it is basically a Flemish film set in 1942, um, during obviously the height of the Second World War, and this part about Belgium, obviously, was invaded at the very beginning of the war and has been occupied since 1939. And young men, when they come of age, have a choice of where they serve. They will get conscripted, or they will be um, given an occupation. And the will of the title is a young Flemish Belgian. Obviously, the Flemish is a distinct ethnic group within Belgium. They have their own language, have their own culture. They sort of they live as sort of they are sort of like quite distinct to the. They speak a slightly different language. They don't speak sort of the French of other parts of Belgium, so they do speak Flemish. And Will, though he's a young man, and he basically has been assigned to become a police officer, and he is told on his first day of duties that your job is to basically to uphold the law, and that you can watch and you don't get involved. You can look at stuff and you can witness it, but don't get involved. So you do your job, and part of your job is just to just
Plod along.
yeah, cooperate.
Yeah.
And obviously they are working under the direct command of. They have their own officers, but you get the feeling they're under the direct command of the sort of the National Socialist, the Nazi Party, who are occupying their country.
Yeah.
And on the first night of his job, he's literally been in the job for 2 weeks. He's out on his first solo patrol with his best friend, who was recruited at the same time. And they go out and they witness a German officer who is harassing a Jewish family, basically extorting them for money, saying, that if you give me your cash, if you give me some of your jewelry, your paintings, I will turn a blind eye and that you won't get deported. And they witness this, and then they have a bit of a confrontation with this one officer, and things sort of some dramatic things happen, and the events of this first night basically have repercussions for the next sort of year of the story. Basically, these two, their eyes are suddenly awakened to how that they know that they're in an occupied country, but their eyes are really opened as to what it entails. That there is a fine line between cooperation and collaboration, and at some points their role has been to cooperate but not to collaborate, so that they can, if there's going to be like a raid where they do a clearance of a particularly Jewish area, that they're there to maintain the peace, but they're not there to drive people out of their homes. They're not there to sort of drive them onto the cattle trucks. They're there just to sort of maintain the peace, but they don't actually participate. That's the job of the soldiers, the German soldiers.
Yeah.
And as the story goes on, this young man, basically his home life becomes into conflict with what he's witnessing as a police officer. And he has got involved with a sort of a young family, and he has begun to aware that they are part of like a resistance group. And so then he's torn between his desire to help to do his job, to help with this with the resistance, and also to sort of maintain like the equilibrium because of the events of the very first night. This is what happened with this German soldier. And so there is it's sort of these themes running through this story. But yeah, I think the main theme is the differences between cooperation and collaboration. And as this young man, he's suddenly been confronted with this real life issue about what you do in that situation. So it deals with issues of the Second World War, as you would imagine, the sort of occupying forces, what happens with Flemish Jews who are sort of they're the same citizens as they are, and how do you turn a blind eye when there's a penthouse suite becomes available? Do you then think, oh, hang on, this is a really nice apartment? Or do you think, why is that penthouse suite suddenly empty?
Available, yeah.
And then if you sort of witness like a small child being abused, do you just watch that because you're not cooperating, you're just watching it, or do you think actually this is wrong? And there's like that moral dilemma. And then if you fall in love with someone who is part of the resistance, do you assist them, or do you there's these questions constant all the way through. And I think it's one of those. It's like almost like a spiral of of disasters for this young man. It starts off with like he's quite optimistic that he could be able to do this. He could be a policeman. He could do his job. And then one sort of mistake leads to another mistake, leads to another, and then there's almost like there's like this descent into chaos for him as the story unfolds. So yes, it's an interesting story, quite powerful. Obviously, all subtitled. The interesting cast of characters, um, where some of them are. I think they've tried to steer away from the stereotypical, jackbooted sort of Nazi that we become to see in cinema.
Yeah.
They've tried to introduce some sort of nuances with some of the characters. Obviously, there's some of them that are out and out Nazis who you think there's a reason why Nazi sounds like nasty because they just are.
Yeah.
But there's also those themes of what happened in the Second World War and countries that were occupied for the whole length of the war, and the impact it had on ordinary people and the police force. How these were people, they're police officers in Belgium and France, in occupied Channel Islands. They were still police officers. They had their job to do, but they're also forced into cooperation with a party who
With-
they didn't agree with their policies.
Oh, so, how many stars would you give this then?
I thought it's a good film. It was received a lot of plaudits in its own country. I mean, it's received awards for best actor, best film, best all sorts of things. So it certainly was a well-made film. It wasn't a jolly film. There's some sort of tough moments in it. I thought it was certainly an interesting film and worth a watch. So I would give it a 4. I think it was, yeah, it's a challenging film in places, but it's certainly one of those ones worth persevering. To add to that lexicon of films that look at the Second World War not in a slightly different way, but it sort of opens our eyes who weren't in occupied countries to say, okay, if we lived in not an occupied country, we can sit back and say, well, that wouldn't have happened if it was in Britain, because we wouldn't do that sort of thing. But you think, well, actually, would it? Would we have been any different with to sort of surviving in unoccupied states like that? So I thought it was interesting. Well, I wouldn't say it was a laugh a minute, but it was certainly an interesting film to sort of get your teeth into.